Hi, my name is Catherine Webster. This is my series called Angels in the Darkness. I wrote this morning. I'm going to read this to you. Angels in the Darkness is my telling of the horrific struggles my family endures within and due to the corrupted system in LA, California, designed to attack the most vulnerable. The abuse of the disabled and homeless is an agony to watch. My own precious granddaughter is denied all disability rights under the law, and the more my precious daughter tries to protect her, the more victim blaming they employ. This is my mission, to protect my girls and tell the truth about a state and city that is so demonic in their abuse and attacks that I now call LA the city of fallen angels. And the truth is, in all that darkness, there are angels. It's a very strange city, a very strange city. I had never experienced anything like it in my life, and I experienced it firsthand. And when you do, it changes you, especially when your family is being attacked like mine is. It changes you forever. I started by telling you about the court hearing, where we walked into court, no lawyer, no advocate, nothing, just ourselves. And we leaned on each other, and we got to the point where our fight brought us to a settlement type situation. And his lawyer, the slumlord's lawyer, she came to us with the fact that we could stay till April 1st, and it would be expunged from my daughter's record. And he did that because he knew there never should have been an unlawful eviction in the first place. And so we thought about that. We thought hard about that, because the next choice appeared to be that we would go to a trial on Christmas Eve. They wanted to start the court trial on Christmas Eve. And we thought, we can't do it. We just can't do it. We can't do it to Michelle. We want her to have at least some kind of normality for Christmas. We're not going to be able to go to the courthouse and pick a jury and fight with these people when we know that because they had said my son-in-law was in default and that he was deceased, they wouldn't accept that. The lawyer told us, if we go to trial, we're going to drop that the day before trial, so you can't use it in the trial, and that will be inadmissible, so you're going to lose. So for my granddaughter's sake, we settled. And my daughter didn't want to, because she knew that if we gave it a good fight, we might be able to come out of this with the housing. But at that point, it was untenable to stay there anyway. So we went along with the settlement. Now this is expunged from my daughter's record, and there is no eviction as such on record, so that can't be used against them. But it was bogus to begin with, and that's why he did that. He had no grounds, and he knew it. Christmas Eve, we were free to have Christmas Eve and not be at trial. And my daughter wrapped her packages for my granddaughter and put them under a little tree. And my granddaughter unwrapped her presents. And they tried to have as normal a night as they could. And I watched, and it was one of the saddest things, the most beautiful, poignant, beautiful things, to watch my daughter try to give my granddaughter the sweetest little Christmas she could, in spite of all the attacks from all of the demonic enemies around us. And it was poignant, And it was beautiful because I was there with my girls. And that's all that mattered in the world to me at that moment. That's all that matters. New Year's Eve, Willie came by to watch the ball drop, and another very poignant moment for the four of us. He left, and early on January 1st, that morning, Michelle became extremely ill. And my daughter has cared for her child for 16 years. And she knows her every cue of when she doesn't feel well. And she does her best to get out in front of it every time. And she said, Mom, something's really wrong. Michelle doesn't feel well. And, you know, I thought, okay, vomiting, there's probably something we can do. And Katie said, it's not just vomiting, Ma. It's not vomiting. It's cyclonic vomiting. Now, I remember this had happened before when I was there, and I immediately knew that this was very serious. With cyclonic vomiting, you start to vomit, and then you start to vomit blood. So Katie knew what was coming immediately and said, we have to go. We have to go to LA Children's Hospital right now. So we put Michelle, we had no car, not gonna put her on the bus in the middle of the night. So we put her in the baby carriage and went the few blocks to the hospital. And we got into the emergency room, and now the LA Children's Hospital, there's a lot of history there. My son-in-law died years before in front of my girls upstairs in the LA Children's Hospital. And that will be discussed in another one of these series. The inhumanity of that situation is tough to bear too, of course. And so we got into the emergency room. Now, I'm nothing if not fair and balanced, so I'm gonna say there are good doctors and nurses in that hospital. And in the emergency room, there were very good doctors and nurses. They treated us very well. They were kind. And I find that the experience in the emergency room usually is somewhat positive. It's when you get upstairs in the hospital that the demonic actions start to take place. So we were in the emergency room, and at that point, my granddaughter's heart rate was so high that they had several cardiologists monitoring her at once. And there came a point during the night where they said, her heartbeat's not coming down. She's in a critical situation. We need to do something, and we need to do it really quickly. They brought her into a certain part of the cardiac acute unit, part of the emergency room. And they started bringing out all these different apparatus that jump your heart, etc. And so at that point, they had medicine that they were going to give Michelle to slow her heartbeat down. But they said, if we give her this, it might also stop her heart. So we have to have everyone in place to get her back. Now, I don't know what the words would be. I can't encapsulate in words the terror that my daughter and I were in at that moment. And my daughter said, I can't lose Michelle here like I lost her daddy. I can't do it. And so we were terrorized, and I had a social worker come over to me at that point. And this social worker was talking to me about how this was going to go and how they needed to do this medicine, and Katie had to consent to this medicine. And Katie was on the verge of consenting to this medicine when Michelle did this little hiccup, sneeze type of thing, and and her heart rate went back down. She kind of did it herself with this little type of spasm that happened, and she brought her heartbeat down herself. So they started monitoring Michelle's heartbeat and said, it's coming back to normal. We don't have to do this. At that point, my daughter was ready to collapse, as well as I. And we were so terrorized, but so grateful that this had happened and that Michelle's heart rate was coming down. But we were scared, obviously terrorized, because the doctor said, we're not sure why this happened. Our best guess is that she's been stressed, and because she can't do anything but internalize it, you know, that's probably what did this. So, you know, we're going to take her upstairs and we're going to monitor her and keep you know, a record of what's going on with her heart rate and make sure whatever this is doesn't come back into effect. I have to say this cardiac specialist was a fine doctor, and he really seemed to care about Michelle a great deal. And so a little bit after that, we went upstairs. And upstairs has horrible memories, horrible connotation for my daughter, as well as my granddaughter and I. We went upstairs, and it started out calm. The whole idea was she was in an acute cardiac unit with a little room off to the side where there were supplies and things if they needed something for some type of emergency. And so during this time, they were monitoring Michelle every few hours, blood pressure, everything. And at that point, my daughter, because it was a highly sterile, had to be a highly sterile environment, my daughter was requesting that everybody put on gloves and a little plastic over cover that would cover their clothes. It's like a little plastic gown type thing. And some of the nurses were coming in without them, and my daughter would say, you need to put that on, please. This is, you know, I got to keep her safe. You got to put this on. And so I could feel the energy moving. I could feel the impatience already. And so I kept monitoring the energy. And one particular night, a couple of nights into the situation, a couple of days, a young nurse came in, and she was going to do the blood pressure and temperature, those different things for Michelle. And Michelle, who is 16, so she's 16. She has a mind of her own. She's highly intelligent. In fact, the fact she cannot articulate her words does not mean that she does not understand to a large degree what's going on. And she's very intelligent. And she'd had enough. She didn't want to do it. And if she had been able to speak, she could have just said, listen, I don't want to do it right now. Come back in a little while, or something like that. But she couldn't do that. So she kind of pushed she kind of grabbed the little plastic thing and kind of like in an effort to say, get away, I don't want you on me. And it was so slight and so minute and so uneventful. And yet the nurse panicked and said, I'm not going to do it right now. Clearly, she doesn't want me to do it. And I said, well, that's her way of saying, you know, you're not hurt, you're fine. Okay, so she can't say, I don't want to do it right now. That's her way of saying, I'm done for now, come back later. Okay, she left. And the air shifted. It just shifted in the room. And so at that point, she came back in. And she said, I'm going to try again. And I said, well, okay, it hasn't been that long. It's just a few minutes. I looked out the door, and there's a security guard standing there, looking in the window. And I said, what is that? Why is he here? What's happening? And she said, well, I called him. And I said, why did you call him? What does he think he's going to do? He's not coming in here. He's not going to scare my granddaughter. He's not touching my granddaughter. What do you think he's going to do? And I'm calm. I'm deadly calm. Because I know at that point, the air has shifted, the room has shifted, and it's upstairs in the LA Children's Hospital. That's where you're going to feel that. We've experienced other things like that, not to this level, but it just never feels like a safe place to be. Let's put it like that. For my family, this was though a different experience. My son-in-law had died upstairs, and that was a horrific experience. Of course, this was taking on another level of energy, and it's hard to describe it because you had to kind of be there to feel the negativity coming from every direction. And so at that point, I said, he has to leave. And Michelle knew then, and Katie knew then, and Katie was panicking, and Michelle was panicking. So when Michelle panics, then she starts getting a little more aggravated. And this is a child who just had a serious life and death heart event. And I said, my granddaughter is fragile. I don't want to see anything like that. And you're not hurt. You're not hurt. No, she didn't do anything to you. Well, I felt uncomfortable and vulnerable. I said, well then, at that point I said, you're a nurse. I mean, nothing happened. Surely, if you're that afraid to be a nurse, then you should quit. This isn't a 200-pound, 16-year-old throwing chairs around the room. This is a little girl who looks about 12 years old, who's had enough for now, and just simply didn't hurt you. She just kind of grabbed onto your little plastic overcoat thing. And I said to have him leave immediately. So she went out and told him to leave. But now the damage was done because now Michelle was terribly upset. We got through the night, and the cardiologist came in the next day, and we said, this can't happen. Okay, we're in a very highly volatile situation here. We don't even know what the first episode was started by. She seemed fine. She was playing with her new Christmas toys, and then this happened. Now you have someone outside who has a uniform on, who's a security guard, and he's peeking in the windows. This can't be. We can't have this. This is not right. And he agreed that it was very risky and foolhardy on her part, but he would speak to the staff. Another day or two went by, and now the nurses are coming in, and I can see it, and I can sense it, and they're, Michelle, can I do this? Can I do that? Can I do, and then backing up, and I said, she's not a bomb getting ready to blow. She's a little tiny girl. You're fine. What is the problem? What's happening? Oh, no, that's fine, that's fine. But one night, not long after that, I look into the other room, and Michelle and I had gone in there, and Michelle was kind of laughing, kind of playing, kind of having a little bit of fun. And I look over to the window, and there's two nurses looking at her and then looking at each other with these horrendously contemptuous looks on their faces. And I'm looking at them like, what is the problem here? She's starting to feel a little better. Nothing was said. I didn't go out of the room. Nothing was said. Another day or two went by, and there's more of this kind of jumping back nonsense. And so I said, everyone's fine. There's, nothing's happened. And they're like, oh, no, that's fine, we understand that. So that next morning, the cardiologist came in, and he said, I'm going to have you leave. And we said, okay, do you feel, it's been a few days, I feel it's okay. I'm not sure why it happened. I believe it's stress of the situation you're in. But I feel it's okay if she goes home. Now, my daughter was, of course, hesitant because she had no real answer, no real resolution. But Michelle seemed to be doing better. And so she said, okay, if you think it's okay. We also had a bit of a stomach bug at that point, too, but it was something that had been going around a little bit. So he decided that was just something that would resolve itself. So he said, yeah, I'm going to let you go. And he said the words, I will never forget as long as I live. He said, I cannot keep Michelle safe here anymore. A cardiologist said to us, I think you need to go home. It's best for you to go home. I can't keep Michelle safe here anymore. And I said, what does that mean? What do you mean you can't keep Michelle safe here anymore? Where are we? What is happening? And he said, no, I think that it's best. I'm going to keep her tonight, and then tomorrow I'm going to discharge you. So we already knew that we were going to be discharged the next morning. And the nurses continued to come in, and they continued to act skittish, foolishly. And we waited for the next morning. The next morning he came in, and he said, I'm going to go ahead and I've discharged you. It'll be okay, just get ready and go. And Michelle had thrown up a little bit and had a little bit of puke in her hair. And so Katie said, can I give her a quick shower and get the puke out of her hair? And he said, yeah, you can go ahead and do that. Go ahead and do that. So we were putting our things together, and Katie was getting ready to wash Michelle's hair a little bit and make sure the puke was out of it. And that's when, I think he hadn't been gone more than 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. And that's when we heard a sharp, aggressive knock on the door. I went over and I cracked it open, and I said, yeah, what's happening? And a Cynthia Hoff, and that's burned into my memory, her name, Cynthia Hoff, said, you have exactly 1/2 hour to leave, or I'm calling security. And I said, we just talked to the doctor. He said we could wash Michelle's hair. We're leaving. Other people need this room. I said, yeah, we waited hours upon hours through the night to get this room. We understand that. We know that. Okay, we're going. We're leaving. And I said, what is the matter with you? Anyway, what's the matter with you? And she said, if you're going to talk to me like that, then you've got 15 minutes before I call security. And I said, you love to do that. You love to get security. What's with security here? There's nothing to secure about. I said, wait right there, and I'll be right out. So at that point, Katie and Michelle were horrified. And Katie said, what's happening, Mother? What's happening? I said, I'm going to go handle this. I'm going to go take care of this right now. And I went out to the nurse's desk, and I said, let me tell you something, okay? You don't need security. We're leaving. I know you're trying to grandstand with your little ego in front of your comrades here, your colleagues. But my granddaughter could have died this week. If you do anything to hurt that little girl, anything, because of your ego and wanting to act like the big boss lady, there's going to be repercussions. I said, I want the supervisor down here immediately. I want administration down here, and I want the cardiologist down here right now. You're not putting my daughter and granddaughter in harm's way. So I went back into the room, and at that point, the social worker came to the door, and I said, what is happening here? I went outside in the hallway. My girls were, I said, don't come out, Katie, don't come out. The negativity out here, they want to escalate this. Don't get upset, let me handle this. They're gonna escalate it. So at that point, the social worker said, you know, you need to leave. I said, we're trying to leave. Okay, we're trying to leave. We're trying to get our things together and leave. And I said, you were there in the room when my granddaughter could have died. You were there. Why aren't you sticking up for us? Why aren't you telling them to back down with this? What's the problem? Why do you need security? I go back over to the desk and security's already upstairs. And he's standing there beside this Cynthia Hoff. And I said, what do you think you're gonna do? You're not touching my girls. So I said, let me get this straight. There's a widowed mother, a disabled child, and I myself have physical disabilities under the law. I'm a disabled grandmother. What do you think you're gonna do today? What do you think you're going to do? Let us leave in peace and stay out of the way so that you don't put my granddaughter in another heart incident. And I went back in the room. I look out that door from the other room, and now there's several doctors, I believe they were doctors, head nurses, and maybe 3 security guards. And I went out and I said, I want the cardiologist and I want administration now, and no one's coming in this room. And at that point, they were all looking in the windows, terrorizing my girls. And I said, they can see you. You're scaring my granddaughter. And they're like, she can't see anything. So they went over, one of them went over one of the doctors. I don't even know what doctor it was or why she was involved in it at all. And fixed the blinds and said, see, they can't see. And I said, this is beyond anything anybody could ever imagine. This can't be. They dispersed after a little bit, and the social worker stayed with me, and I said, you know, there's going to be repercussions to this. There's going to be. And nothing better happened to my granddaughter. And Katie was in there trying to calm Michelle down. And at that point, everyone dispersed. And after a few minutes, the cardiologist came up and he said, Kathy, I'm going to walk you out of here. I'm going to literally walk you out of here. I have to walk you out of here. Get everything together. Get Michelle and Katie. I'm walking you out of here to the main street so that you'll be safe. There's no words. There's no words. How can anybody... Yes, they were complicit in my son-in-law's death. There's no question. But a little girl, a little child who nearly died just days before, the demonic negativity, I don't even have words. And all I could do at that point was keep things from boiling over to the point where they wanted to escalate it. So I stayed deathly calm, and we did what he said. And we walked out, and the cardiologist walked out with us. At that point, my daughter grabbed her phone and started taping and saying, we are under duress. We're leaving LA Children's Hospital under duress. We are being thrown out of LA Children's Hospital right now. And as they walked us out, they walked behind us. He was with us, and we walked out. And one of the security guards, there was one, actually at this point, there was no one at the nurse's desk or anything, and we walked out with the cardiologist and the one of the security guards. He walked for a little ways, and then we got on the elevator with the cardiologist, and he walked us out of the entire hospital. It's a very big hospital, so we went down the elevator with him, and then he walked us out of the main lobby where the security were watching us down there, and then he walked us out of the main lobby onto the sidewalk. And I said to him, have you ever experienced anything like this in your life, that a cardiologist has to walk his patient out? And he looked like he might cry, because this was his patient. My grandbaby is his patient. And the diabolical abuse of this, where he could have been trying to save her life at any moment during those days, but certainly this day, there's no words. We got out on the sidewalk and we honestly could not process it. We couldn't process it. We didn't know. We just looked at each other and we grabbed hold of Michelle and see if she was okay. She wasn't crying. Devastation's not even the word, but we were so happy that she appeared to be not crying, and that we had somehow kept our nerves and ourselves together enough so that it didn't transfer to her that we were terrified. I was not terrified of those people. I was terrified of what they were going to do to my granddaughter. Those people, you felt like you were facing the devil. To put a child in that position. Cynthia Hoff thought, well, they'd all been talking at the nurse station. I'm going to grandstand here, go over, throw my weight around. She could have killed my grandbaby. How is she in nursing? How are 90% of the people involved in that hallway should not be in that hallway at all? If you're going to put a child in harm's way like that, you need to be dismissed and you need to be called out immediately, because you should not be around vulnerable, disabled children who can't even speak up for themselves or articulate their feelings. And that's one of the reasons that stress gets so high, and they know it, because she couldn't even stand up for herself. Her mom and I do it. We walked out and went back to the house. And on the way home, another beautiful moment, in spite of all the pain and suffering and hideous activity, we walked together and I picked her up as best I could. She's not that heavy. And she laughed and we kind of swung our hands, and I was with my girls, and that's all that mattered. That was the first, that was the January hospital incident. Last week, because my girls are still they're not in stable housing. My daughter has made sure, and she finances it herself. No help from anyone, that my grandbaby has a roof over her head. But out there, they want my granddaughter living in a cardboard box or a tent before they'll call them homeless. So they have my daughter in this catch-22, of course, where if you've made the effort and got any kind of roof over someone's head, they're not technically totally unhoused, as they love to put it. Homeless being the real word. So this last week, and this is how deep this goes, I thanked one nonprofit last week for trying their best to help my girls. It'll no doubt be a nonprofit because the agencies are so corrupt. And last week, it came to my attention that the person I was talking to is in such denial about how it is out there that they themselves don't understand the level of corruption. So when we spoke, there was a few things he said that really bring it all more to light as to the level of abuse and corruption out there. And he said, well, you should have gone to PATH. PATH will help you. I said, we went to PATH. We went to PATH the week before April 1st. We did everything we had to do. My daughter did all the paperwork, everything. They denied her. They also refused her a denial letter. But we went to PATH. We did that. No, that's not true. He said, that's not true. They would have helped. I said, it is true. They didn't help. We went that avenue. They flat out refused to help her. Okay, I find that very hard to believe. I said, well, I lived it. It's my experience. I really don't care if you don't believe it. That's why the help hasn't come from them, because they wouldn't do it. And then he said, well, Willie, my daughter's partner who has the diabetes, has to take insulin twice a day and has his foot removed. The hospital would have put him in the nursing home. And I said, no, that's not true. Willie couldn't go in the nursing home. They told us, either bring him to the motel with you or we're putting him on the street. That never happened. I said, yes, it did happen. I was there, we were there, we had him brought back to the motel, or he was going to go on the street. Okay, I find that hard to believe. I said, you know, you can call me a liar all day long. I don't care. I'm past it. I don't care. I know what happened. I was there. I lived it. This is my lived experience. No one's going to tell me what I lived. I know what I lived. I said, I recognize that it's hard to believe, but it is true. And at that point, he said, well, they should have put him in a nursing home. I said, they should have. They should have. But they didn't. And now my daughter is trying desperately she's taking care of her daughter, and she's also taking care of her partner. And it brings me to the thought of how many times I walk down Sunset or Western or Virgil, all these connecting places, and time after time there would be wheelchair after wheelchair, people sitting in their wheelchairs on the street and alone, different races. Poverty knows no race. As many people, white as black, sitting there in their own feces, their own urine, people laying on mattresses, feces on the door handles of stores, the urine smell all over the street, people camping out on the street, cooking. He can be in denial, but he must not have gone down the street, because these people that were in these wheelchairs didn't just decide to live on the street in a wheelchair. They were thrown out of these medical places, the hospitals. That's why they're there. No one would choose to live like this. No one would want to have no one to help them and to sit in a chair and sit in their own feces. Nobody wants that. And so he's saying, my experience isn't true, but all he has to do is walk down the street and see how these people are treated. The abuse of the disabled is so hard to watch. It's so cruel that it is like you're walking down 15th century Europe. You're just in another century before there were any disability laws or any protections in place at all. And these people are literally homeless. They don't go into nursing homes. They go onto the street. And I recently, at that point, I said, I don't care if you believe me or not. I know what happened. And that's all I need to know. I know what my girls are going through. I feel in my heart, part of it is that he's so entrenched in the system that he himself doesn't even realize or refuses to admit how bad it is. I don't think that this person doesn't want to do anything for my girls, but there was more victim blaming. And then he said, everyone that's homeless, the county likes everyone that's homeless to go through mental health screening. You pretty much have to if you want to get housing. And I said, well, wow. They need to go through all of this to make sure their mental health is. I said, you know, that's your narrative, isn't it? That's beautiful how you've set that up in this state. That's the narrative. So everyone that wants housing has to go through these mental health agencies. Okay, then you can turn around on paper and say, everyone homeless is mentally ill or addicted. I mean, we have it on paper. They came through here. They came through there not because they were mentally ill or addicted. Some people just simply lose their housing because they have a horrible demonic slumlord who just hates women and females in general. But some people don't have these issues, but if you put them through that situation and it's on paper they went through, then the state can turn around and say, everyone that's homeless has some kind of mental illness or addiction. They've set it up that way. How brilliant on their part to create a narrative that the rest of the country, the rest of the world will believe because they've set it up that way. It's just so demonic. Some people will do anything to get a roof over their head because they don't want to live on the street in a tent or a box. So then they go through these we'd like everyone to go through these agencies first. I'm sure you do. Because instead of just saying, here's this disabled family, here's this disabled man, this child, let's put them through more ringer instead of just getting them housing and saying, you know, you're going to feel better once you have stable housing. It fits the state's narrative. I watched this thing this last week that played into this, of course, where a woman on the internet said she had seen Skid Row and she had seen all these different places where the homeless lived, and there was urine everywhere and it smells and there's tents and they're everywhere. I think they like it like that. I think it's normal for them. I think, yeah, they get used to it and and I was horrified. Another person, absolutely no conception of what's going on. Nobody wants to live like that. Do they get used to it? Well, a human being can get used to a lot of things. A human being, any living creature can get used to and adapt to a lot of things that they shouldn't probably adapt to, but they do adapt. And especially when you have a system that is set up to put you in this position and keep you there. You don't want it. You don't think it's normal. You don't normalize it in your own head. You just survive it. And then people say, oh, that's how they live. I think another person who has no conception of what they're talking about at all, no depth, no feeling, no compassion for what people go through. And I met lots of homeless people on the street, because when I was out walking with some groceries to go back and get my girls some little snack to maybe make them feel a little better, I would walk by these people in the wheelchairs. I would walk by these people in the tents. I would walk by these people with their little dogs they were trying to play with. Number one, these people loved their animals. I had more than one person say to me, I will feed my dog over myself every time. I know that's true. I lived that. I saw that. I actually befriended a homeless man who had a little puppy dog. He loved that dog more than his own life. I walked by these people and their little puppy dogs, and I said, hi, sweetie, how are you today? Well, they're eating. I'm not, but they are. homeless person after homeless person. The people in the wheelchairs, how are you? I know how you are. I know what you're going through, okay? I know it can't be. No bitterness on their part, no rancor, no vitriol, no, just brokenness. And they would talk to me. No broken, they're just broken. They're not even angry anymore. They've surrendered. They just surrendered. And someone actually spoke to them. And I would be so upset because I'd be so aware that without my daughter doing everything she could to keep a roof over my grandbaby's head, that's what the state wants for my girls. That's what they're trying to do to my family. I'm doing everything in my power to make sure that doesn't happen. My daughter's doing everything to make sure that doesn't happen. She's also putting a roof over her partner's head because the hospitals threw him out. That's the truth, whether that person in that agency wants to believe it or not. That's the truth. This is the reality out there. And I do not believe that any homeless person, and I met quite a few of them, and not one of them was bitter toward me or angry toward me or anything except amazed that someone actually spoke to them and didn't just walk by them or ignore them like they were just a ghost. None of them were anything but broken and surrendered, but they weren't angry or bitter. These are some of the angels. The angels. You find angelic energy in these people who have nothing and lost everything. I'm not going to romanticize it. I'm not trying to do that. There are homeless people they were before, and now they're homeless, and if they were violent before, now they are too. The homelessness doesn't necessarily make them violent. They were that to start with. So I'm not going to sit here and say there's no addicted people, there's no violent people. Of course there are. But they're there in every society, in every income bracket. So that's put on the homeless because that will manifest in the homeless because they were like that before they were homeless. And maybe some of that played into them being homeless, but the vast majority of people are homeless because that's the way the state wants it. The machine is run to make them homeless. No, that's true. I've lived it. I'm living it now. I live in a state where there's more compassion, and I'm very lucky to live in a state where I have housing. And my girls could come home to me anytime. Nothing would make me happier, but there are situations where I have no hospital near me where my granddaughter can get the help that she needs. Right now, she's near Cedars-Sinai, which is a much better hospital. My granddaughter has situations where she needs immediate care, and Dartmouth is the closest to me. So it's not an option. And also the winters are so cold here, she couldn't tolerate that either. So that, for anyone who's thinking, wow, can't they come to you? Of course they could. Of course they could come to me anytime always. But Cedars-Sinai is where my granddaughter needs to be beside right now, and that's where we are right now in that whole situation. They still don't have stable housing. That's what I'm trying to do right now, is find them something permanent and stable so they don't have to worry about not being able to stay the next day or the next day or the next day. Because that's how it is with the motels and things. You have the next day and the next day and the next day. You have no security and you have no idea what's going to come next. And in another series, another show, probably next week, I'll discuss the abuse of the motels as well. Because the abuse runs throughout, I can tell you right now, the abuse runs through every agency. It runs through the Social Security office, the housing agencies, the police system, the landlords, the hospitals. The abuse is in every agency. They're all contaminated. And I know people look at it and say, it's so far gone. It's so far gone. How can anything ever be righted? It's not going to be easy because everything there is corrupted and contaminated at this point and set up to destroy the citizens of California. There's no question. And so next week will be the continuing of the abuse that my granddaughter and daughter received at Social Security. There's quite a bit more to come. Another hospital visit. I'm going to sign off now because I'm not going to lie to you, reliving this is so difficult. Because the very place that should have kept my granddaughter safe could have put her life, they could have ended her life. They could have killed her. And the seriousness of the situation can't be overstated. So thank you for listening to me and your attention to this. And I will see you next week. Thank you.